Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. It was one of those evenings where the music hummed through the walls, laughter bounced off the chandelier, and everyone seemed intent on letting the week's worries melt away. I'd had a long week myself, but tonight, I was here to relax, unwind, and maybe catch up with friends. My wife, Claire, looked stunning as always. She had on a sleek black dress, her hair falling in loose curls around her shoulders, and every few minutes, I'd catch her glancing at her phone, flashing a quick smile before tucking it away in her purse. I'd noticed this habit of hers increasingly lately. At first, I didn't think much of it, who wasn't constantly glued to their phone these days? But tonight, something felt different. There was a faint tension in her smile, a nervous edge to the way she held herself. When I mentioned it, she brushed it off with a laugh, but her eyes darted away, giving me the sense that something was brewing under the surface. The evening unfolded as most of these gatherings did. Small talk, a few drinks, conversations about the economy and vacations. I drifted from group to group, finding my rhythm, getting lost in the familiarity of it all. But the illusion of normalcy cracked wide open when I saw him, a tall, well-dressed man with an easy grin, the kind you might trust at first sight but then later question. He'd just walked in and was making his way over to our table, his gaze fixed on Claire in a way that left little doubt that he knew her well. Too well. I kept my cool, waiting to see how this interaction would unfold. Claire's smile stiffened as he approached, and I could tell by the slight clench of her jaw that she wasn't entirely thrilled to see him, but there was a familiarity there that left me feeling like I was on the outside looking in on a secret I wasn't supposed to know. "Hey, Claire," he greeted her with a casual familiarity that didn't sit right with me. He turned to me, extending his hand. "Name's Josh. Claire and I have, crossed paths at work." Crossed paths at work? I could feel my pulse quicken, but I kept my face neutral as I shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Josh." Didn't know Claire had such close colleagues outside her team. The comment was meant to be light, but there was a weight to it that neither Josh nor Claire could ignore. Josh chuckled, the kind of laugh that was more about deflecting than anything else. "Oh, you know how it is, big projects and all. Anyway, I just wanted to say hi." With a quick nod, he excused himself, melting back into the crowd, but not before I caught Claire's eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. Was it guilt? Anxiety? I waited a beat, letting the moment breathe, then turned to her. "So, crossed paths at work, huh?" Claire laughed, a little too loudly, and took a sip of her drink. "Yeah, you know how work is. Everyone's got to collaborate here and there." Sure, I said, nodding, though my mind was already racing. This wasn't adding up. Claire had mentioned Josh once before, only in passing, but never as someone she was this close with. Something about the way she acted when he showed up tonight told me there was more to the story. I kept quiet, letting the evening unfold, but inside, I was already strategizing. The rest of the party felt surreal. I watched Claire as she laughed with her friends, tried to enjoy myself as best I could, but there was a sour taste to the whole affair now, one that lingered every time I thought about her reaction to Josh. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just tonight. For the past few months, Claire had been spending more time away from home, claiming she was stuck late at work or had business dinners to attend. I'd believed her without a second thought, trusting that our relationship was rock solid. Now, I wasn't so sure. When we got home that night, I decided to play it cool. I watched her closely, catching the way she kept checking her phone, even though it was well past midnight and most people would be asleep. She'd laugh softly to herself, then close her phone quickly whenever I looked her way. The next morning, after Claire left for work, I did something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, something she rarely did, and I couldn't resist the urge to check. But as soon as I picked it up, the screen lit up, and there was a message notification from Josh. The message was simple, Last night was risky, but worth it. Can't wait to see you again soon. Asterisk. I felt my stomach drop, my pulse drumming loudly in my ears. I couldn't believe what I was reading. In one short message, everything I'd built with Claire, everything I'd believed about our relationship, crumbled right before my eyes. I set the phone down, forcing myself to stay calm, but the anger was already simmering. I wasn't about to fly off the handle, though. No, if Claire was willing to betray me like this, then I was going to be smart about it. I'd play along, act as though everything was normal, all the while planning my next move. She'd chosen to lie and deceive, and I was determined to expose her betrayal in a way that would leave her no room to twist the truth. The morning after I found that message on Claire's phone, I felt as if I was navigating a waking nightmare. Every sound, every shadow in our home felt different, tainted. My wife had crossed a line I never imagined she'd even come close to, and now I was left to decide how to proceed. The message had been so casual, as if deceit was nothing more than a routine part of her day. Last night was risky, but worth it. That one sentence played on repeat in my mind, mocking me. But I wouldn't react yet. I wouldn't confront her with accusations. Instead, I'd be patient, calculating, and I'd make sure she'd feel the consequences of her actions without the satisfaction of thinking she'd gotten away with it. The first thing I did was reach out to a private investigator. A recommendation from a friend who had been in a similar situation. The man I hired, a quiet professional named Greg, listened to my suspicions without judgment. I shared with him the message, the patterns I'd noticed in her behavior over the last few months, and, of course, the unexpected visit from Josh at the party. Greg nodded, jotting down notes, his expression calm and focused. "Look, I know how hard this must be," Greg said as we finished up. "I'll gather whatever you need to confirm things. It won't take long." I left that meeting with a sense of grim determination. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work, but the edges of my mind stayed sharp, constantly alert to any new detail that might reveal Claire's intentions. I became observant, picking up on subtleties that I would have missed before. I'd notice how she left her phone face down on the counter or how she'd text with the screen angled away from me. And every night, I'd lie next to her in bed, feeling the gap between us widen, stretching with the weight of her deception. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder. "I feel like we don't spend enough time together lately," she murmured. The irony of her statement almost made me laugh out loud. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "I've been thinking the same." I let my hand slide gently across her back, watching as she closed her eyes, perhaps mistaking my silence for genuine tenderness. I wondered if she had any idea what was coming. As the days passed, Greg started sending me updates. She was meeting Josh once or twice a week, typically during her lunch breaks or late work meetings. He included pictures and details of each encounter, which only solidified what I already knew but wished wasn't true. And still, I maintained my calm around Claire, giving her no reason to suspect that I was piecing together the truth. One Thursday night, Claire told me she'd be staying late at the office, working on a presentation. I played my part, encouraging her to focus on her work and to take all the time she needed. As soon as she left, I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder Greg had been updating regularly. The most recent images were there, Claire laughing with Josh over coffee, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was too familiar for mere friendship. Looking at those photos, I felt the anger flare inside me, but I let it cool, reminding myself that reacting impulsively wouldn't get me what I wanted. What I wanted was to be smart about this, to turn the tables so that when I confronted her, it would be with a power that would strip away her defenses and excuses. So, instead of rushing into confrontation, I sat back and let her continue playing her game, unaware that I'd already outmaneuvered her. The final piece of my plan took shape after I'd watched her sneak off for yet another work dinner. This time, I called her office from a private number, pretending to be a client. Her assistant picked up, and after a bit of casual conversation, I managed to confirm that Claire wasn't actually on any work-related assignments that evening. She'd lied about her whereabouts with a confidence that told me this wasn't her first deception, and certainly not her last. My patience paid off when, a few weeks later, Claire mentioned she'd be away for a weekend work retreat with some clients. I played along, helping her pack and asking questions about the fake itinerary she'd invented, watching as she spun her lies with practiced ease. This would be the weekend I would turn things around. After she left, I messaged Greg. Go ahead and follow her to wherever she's actually going. I want everything documented. He confirmed with a brief reply, and I settled in for what would be the longest 2 days of my life. On Sunday night, as I waited for her return, Greg sent over a summary of the weekend. She'd spent it at a nearby lodge with Josh, lounging by the pool, drinking, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. Photos, receipts, and descriptions of their interactions filled the report he'd compiled. I was ready. When she walked through the door that evening, she looked almost refreshed, the lingering glow of her affair still faintly visible on her face. I greeted her with a warm smile, leaning in to kiss her cheek. How was the work retreat? I asked, my voice perfectly casual. Oh, just exhausting. Those clients never stop talking, she replied, feigning weariness. But I could see the subtle sparkle in her eyes, the one that spoke of satisfaction she couldn't fully hide. I waited until she'd settled into bed, telling me how relieved she was to be home. Then I opened my phone and looked through the photos Greg had sent. One picture in particular caught my eye, Claire leaning against Josh's shoulder by the lodge pool, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. It was all the confirmation I needed. For the next few nights, I started setting small traps. I'd make offhand comments about work friends she didn't have, or about the new restaurant I knew she'd been to with Josh. I enjoyed watching her reactions, the quick flicker of surprise in her eyes each time I hinted at her betrayal without actually revealing what I knew. The game had shifted now, and I could feel my anger cooling into a calculated resolve. It wouldn't be long until the final reveal, and I could tell Claire sensed that something was off. She'd catch me looking at her in ways I hadn't before, but she couldn't quite place the reason. That doubt, that hint of paranoia growing in her, was almost as satisfying as the confrontation I had planned. I knew she thought she could manage the situation, that she was the one in control. But little did she know, the pieces were already falling into place, and soon she'd be the one left reeling, scrambling to pick up what remained of her lies. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. I'd spent weeks orchestrating every detail, and now everything was set for the reveal. I wanted Claire to feel the weight of her choices, to face her lies without escape. My patience had lasted longer than I thought possible, and now I'd get my payoff. That Saturday morning, I woke early, feeling the quiet adrenaline that comes with knowing you're on the edge of something irreversible. I let Claire sleep in, deciding to give her one last moment of peace before I shattered the comfortable illusion she'd built. I went downstairs, made coffee, and mentally rehearsed how I wanted things to unfold. This was my stage now, and every word I spoke would cut through her web of lies. Eventually, she made her way downstairs, yawning and stretching as if life were perfectly ordinary. I watched her as she moved through the kitchen, pouring herself coffee, her gaze drifting over me with an ease that now felt foreign. My fingers itched to pull out my phone and lay out the evidence in one swift blow, but I resisted. Timing was everything. "Any plans today?" she asked as she took a sip of her coffee, giving me a lazy smile. "Not really," I replied, matching her nonchalance. "Thought we could have a day at home. Maybe spend some time together." I leaned in, pretending to be affectionate, while inside, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. She had no idea that everything was about to change. She shrugged, noncommittal. "Yeah, sounds good. Perfect." After breakfast, I invited her to sit with me in the living room. She seemed slightly wary, maybe sensing the seriousness in my voice, but obliged, settling into the armchair opposite mine. I glanced down at the folder in my lap, the evidence I'd compiled, and met her eyes. "I need to talk to you about something," I began, keeping my tone steady. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she forced a casual smile. "All right, what's on your mind?" For a moment, I just looked at her, letting the silence hang. "Do you remember that weekend work retreat?" I asked, watching her closely. "The one you went on about 3 weeks ago?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. Yeah. Why?" "Well," I said, my voice tightening, "I've got a few things I want to go over about that weekend." I slid the folder across the coffee table toward her. She hesitated, her eyes shifting from the folder back to me, looking for a clue as to what this was about. But I offered nothing, keeping my expression calm. Slowly, she reached forward, flipped it open, and the color drained from her face. There, staring back at her, were photos of her and Josh at the lodge, hand in hand by the pool, sharing drinks, laughing together like they didn't have a care in the world. I watched as her eyes skimmed over the images, panic flaring in her expression, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. How did you get these?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think the real question is how you thought you could keep this from me," I replied, unable to keep the edge of bitterness from my tone. "How long were you planning to keep lying to me, Claire? Or was this just supposed to be your new normal, sneaking off with him whenever you felt like it?" She looked down, her hands trembling as she closed the folder. "It wasn't like that," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Really?" "Because it sure looks like it from where I'm sitting," I replied coldly. "You lied to my face for months, Claire. You fed me stories about late nights at work and business trips, all the while sneaking around with him. Did you even care how this would affect me? Or was I just part of the scenery in your little game?" She finally met my gaze, her eyes glassy with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. Didn't you?" I scoffed. "Because every time you looked me in the eye and lied, every time you covered up your little lunch breaks and work meetings, you made a choice. You chose to betray me, and you did it willingly." The tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. For a moment, the sight stirred a pang of something close to sympathy in me, but I shoved it aside. This wasn't the time for mercy. "Look at me," I said firmly. She looked up, her face blotchy, eyes red-rimmed. "I need you to understand something, Claire. I gave you everything. I trusted you completely. And you threw it away for, what? Some cheap thrill with him?" "It wasn't like that," she repeated, shaking her head. "It was a mistake. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. I know that now." "A mistake?" I echoed bitterly. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, or leaving the lights on. What you did was a choice." Repeatedly. "And now, we're at the end of it." She went silent, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. The weight of my words settled heavily over us, filling the room with an oppressive silence. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for the final blow. "You're going to pack your things. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I've started the paperwork for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she shook her head. "Please, don't do this. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can get through this. We can work on it, rebuild the trust. I'll do anything." "Anything?" I asked, letting my words hang in the air. "Would you have been willing to do anything if I hadn't caught you? Or would you have kept lying, kept pretending everything was fine while sneaking around with him?" Her mouth opened, then closed, and I could see the truth in her silence. If I hadn't uncovered her secret, she would have continued her charade indefinitely, content to play both roles as long as she thought she could get away with it. I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "There's nothing to work on here, Claire. You made sure of that. You chose your path, and now I'm choosing mine. I'll give you 2 days to pack up your things and find somewhere else to stay. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please let me stay. I love you, I do. Her words rang hollow, and I forced myself to keep my voice steady as I replied. Love isn't just a word you use when things go wrong, Claire. It's a commitment, a promise. And you broke that promise the moment you chose him over me. You have 2 days. She looked down, defeated, and nodded slowly, her shoulders slumped in resignation. I understand, she murmured, barely audible. I stood up, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting from my shoulders. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, all of it felt like it was finally receding, leaving behind a sense of quiet resolution. I had made my choice, and I would see it through. As I walked upstairs, I left her there, alone with her guilt and the hollow consequences of her actions. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment to finally breathe again. I closed the bedroom door behind me, shutting out the sound of her quiet sobs, and lay down, feeling the first sense of peace I'd known in months. This was the end of our story, and I was ready to write a new one where I wasn't weighed down by the burden of lies and betrayal. I spent the next few days carrying out my decision, keeping my distance from Claire as she packed her things. There was an emptiness in the house, a strange silence in place of the usual sounds of shared routines and quiet conversations. I knew this emptiness was a necessary sacrifice, but as I watched her prepare to leave, a faint echo of our past lingered, memories of late nights and shared laughter, all tainted now but still haunting. By the evening before her departure, the house felt almost hollow, stripped of her belongings and the warmth that had once filled it. I thought I'd be relieved when she left, that the freedom would feel like a gift. But there was a gnawing ache within me, an unsettling realization that no matter how right this decision was, it would hurt for a long time. Then, around midnight, as I sat alone in the darkened living room, I heard a quiet knock on the door. Confused, I opened it to find Claire standing there, looking more vulnerable and broken than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to stay strong, to stand by the decision I'd made. But something in her expression, something deeply sorrowful and raw, stirred the old feelings I thought I'd buried. I stepped aside, letting her in, though every nerve in me felt conflicted. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the floor. The silence stretched until she finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and tear-streaked. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever make right," she began, her voice trembling. "And I know you don't owe me anything, but I can't leave without saying this." She swallowed hard, her gaze steady on me. "I made the biggest mistake of my life, and if I could take it back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is tell you that I am so sorry." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Sorry doesn't change anything, Claire. You've made your choices, and now we have to live with them." "I know," she whispered, her face crumpling. "I know, and that's what I hate the most, that I did this to us. I destroyed something beautiful because I was selfish and stupid. I lost sight of what mattered, and now I have to pay for it." For a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who had once meant the world to me. And I felt that familiar pang of regret, a longing for what could have been. But I knew I couldn't let myself soften, this was a path she'd chosen, and now we both had to face the consequences. She looked down, her fingers twisting around the hem of her shirt. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to ever want to see me again. But I just want you to know that I love you, truly. And I will always regret what I've done to us." I sat there, unable to find words, grappling with a deep sadness that seemed to fill the room. It was as if all the hurt and betrayal had condensed into this one moment, leaving us both staring at the ashes of what we'd once built together. Claire rose slowly, her movements hesitant. I'll go now. I wanted to say goodbye. She turned, pausing at the doorway, and looked back one last time. Her eyes met mine, and I saw in them a mix of regret and sorrow so profound it cut straight through me. But I said nothing, only watched as she stepped into the night, the soft click of the door echoing in the empty house. Hours later, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening. I tried to sleep, tried to shake off the feelings swirling inside me, but the image of her tear-streaked face lingered in my mind, a ghost that refused to fade. Then, around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Groggy and confused, I grabbed it, my heart sinking as I read the text from her sister, asterisk, I don't know if you know this, but Claire checked herself into the hospital tonight. She's not in a good place. She left a note for you. Asterisk. I felt my stomach twist as I scrambled out of bed, hands shaking. I hadn't known, hadn't seen it coming. Guilt settled over me like a weight as I replayed every harsh word, every moment of anger I'd felt. Despite everything, I'd never wanted her to fall apart like this. I drove to the hospital in a haze, each minute dragging painfully as I imagined her alone, broken in ways I hadn't understood. When I arrived, her sister met me, eyes swollen from crying. She handed me a folded piece of paper, Claire's handwriting scrawled across the front, for you. With a deep breath, I opened it. Asterisk, I'm sorry. I thought I could handle the consequences, but I realize now I can't. Losing you feels like losing a part of myself, and I'm not strong enough to face that. I just wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you, even when I lost sight of what we had. I'll always carry that love with me, no matter where this leads, asterisk. The weight of her words settled over me, a grief so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. The regret was overwhelming, knowing that we'd both been wrong, that in our anger and pain, we'd torn down something that could never be rebuilt. They let me in to see her, and there she was, lying quietly, her face pale against the stark white sheets. I reached out, took her hand in mine, and for a brief moment, the walls between us dissolved. In that silence, in the cold hospital room, I felt the reality of our loss settle over me, a sorrow that would stay with us both, unspoken, for the rest of our lives.